Galatians chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. The word of the Lord. All right, you may be seated. Hey, can we just get into a rhythm that once the word of the Lord is done, you can just sit? Because I don't like telling you, hey, you now may be seated, as if I can tell you what to do. Well, there was one announcement that our brother Joseph left off, was from yesterday. Him and his now fiancée, Kristen, got engaged. And I got to be a part of the day, which was pretty cool. Help, get things set up and come with a camera and take photos and video and all that, which was really cool. But there's just one word that I want to ask the church if you're familiar with this, and I want to tell you a story right after it. Who here has heard the word bridezilla before? Most people? Okay. Now, I'm not saying Kristen is a bridezilla, but there is an interesting story that happened after the yes happened. So Joe gets down on one knee. She says, yeah, yes. And they kiss, which I was not in promotion of. Well, then, after all the photos and the videos are seemingly done, I'm coming up forward just to give my congratulations, right? And so before I can say anything, Kristen's standing here looking like this. And then she goes, Tyler, what are these trees still doing here? Immediately starts correcting me, and I'm doing something wrong. I explained myself, hey, we've consciously chosen to keep them up. But, there's just something about, when the girl gets the ring on her finger, the ambiguity is gone. And there's just safety there so she can just say what she wants to say. And I took the brunt of it yesterday. So, Joe, best of luck to you, my brother. Kristen, I kid. Now, normally I'm not that funny out of the gate, so I'm having a hard time transitioning into something serious. As mentioned earlier, actually in our announcements, we are starting our prayer ministry back up in April, first Wednesday of April, April 6th, not the 4th. But we just invite you to be here. We invite you to come and pray and be a part of that. That was something we were talking about this week, and how do we orient ourselves on this idea of prayer. There's just value in the church coming together and the church praying together and being in one mind and unity and just pleading for the same things. Like Joe said, that you don't really get the whys behind why that's important, but God calls us to, and he moves in it. Like when the church is in one step. When Paul calls the church in Philippians to be in the one mind, striving together for the sake of the gospel, we do this in prayer. We do this with petitioning our God. And I was just convicted this week as I talked about it with our team, and I said, is prayer a focal point of Phos? Like if people came in where they know that that's foundational, that it's one of our values. I said, I don't know. I said, you guys answer that question for me. And I'm not asking that because I think anyone's failing. I'm asking that because I'm thinking, am I failing? Right? Because leadership sets the thermostat. And so if it's not a culture here, if it's not a priority here, then I want to look in the mirror and say, okay, what am I not doing? And so we just began discussing, we began talking, okay, what does prayer look like here? Well, we have a prayer chain as it stands right now. Many of you come to me with requests, call, text, and then I put it on a group thread. And everybody responds, we're praying. And I said, but beyond that, like, what does it look like corporately here? And I think about this last 18 months, and we're seeing community develop here, and we're seeing people come and grow in relationship with the Lord. But I ask myself, okay, do we get beyond the preaching? Do we get beyond fellowship? Do we actually pray? Do we actually pray? And I thought about last summer, and we bought these tents, and we started grilling out on Sundays afterwards, and people would stick around, and great percentage of you stuck around, and you hung out, and you enjoyed beef, and I love beef. And so it was a good time. And this week, as I was thinking about that, and we're still gonna continue to do that. That's, that is foundational to Phos. But sometimes that takes a couple hours, right? You'd stick around for a couple hours after the service, and I wondered what our response would be if I said, "Hey, church, and beautiful weather out there today, but we're going to stick in here for a couple hours afterwards, and we're going to lift each other up. We're going to lift up our personal needs and our professional needs and our physical needs, and we'll just, hey, if there's a need here, let's pray about it. Let's petition God for it." And actually believe that prayer is going to do something. And so the question that I got to in our meeting on Monday was, do I pray enough? Do I pray enough? And ask yourself, maybe you're thinking that question right now, do I pray enough? And if you're like me, I felt uncomfortable asking that question. I wondered, do I actually, because I probably don't. Maybe your answer is differently. Maybe you do. Maybe you wake up before your eyes even open, you're already in prayer to God. Maybe your coworkers can't find you because you're hiding underneath your desk just praying all day. Maybe that's you, but my guess is it's probably not. My guess is it's probably not. But I also came to the same conclusion in that same meeting, was that that's not a good question to ask. Because what's enough? What's the benchmark for that? How do you measure, am I praying enough? And then how do you not then treat prayer like a chore, like a thing that needs just to get done so you can check it off? And so the question I think that's good for us to ask, the question that I think might be helpful is, does your prayer life communicate that I'm desperate for God to work and to move in my life? Well, like, would my time before the Lord, would it convey a message? Would it say, I'm desperate for God to move? And it goes beyond just personal. I do think about this corporately. What does our church say? Are we desperate for God to move? Like we say, we want to see lives transformed for the sake of the gospel around Sterling Heights and Metro Detroit. But does our prayer lives communicate that we're desperate for God? And do we believe that apart from God, we can do nothing? Right? Like this is a function of the church. We went through Acts for an entire year. We see that prayer is foundational to the church. They were desperate for God to work, and God's the one that brings the increase. God's the one that does the work of salvation. We get to play a piece, but we're not the ones saving anybody. And so when I think about, okay, corporately, are we communicating that we're desperate for God? And if the answer is no, then I wonder why. Why would we not be desperate for God to work and to move? And I think the answer is twofold. I think the answer can be that we're not desperate for God because we don't really believe prayer does anything. Maybe for you say, hey, I have times I've prayed to God, and when I'm sitting there and I'm praying and I'm sitting in my room, I just feel like I'm talking to an empty space. That could be you. That could be exactly where you're at, but I'm telling you, I could just never land there. I could never land there, because of what the Bible teaches and what history has shown us, but also just in my own personal life, where I've seen God move, where I've seen God work, where He's done things that were outside of my control. And then the other potential reason could be that we think that we're strong enough on our own. But I just don't see that in the early church. I don't see celebrity pastors in the new church, in the New Testament church. I don't see things flourishing in Antioch because Peter was the one bringing the powerhouse messages. No, Peter was not bringing the powerhouse messages in Antioch. Antioch started flourishing because some people, remember when we went through Acts, we talked about some people devoted their lives to Jesus. They're nameless. They didn't have a name that would be recognized, but there were some people that really believed that God would work through them, and they took their gifts and they leveraged them for the kingdom. Right? And so I just think, okay, prayer must be foundational to what we're doing here. We must be desperate for God to work, and we are just some people. I don't know anybody in here that's on Forbes magazine. If you are, please, let's hang out afterwards. I'd love to hang out with you. But it's foundational. The church is not just, and I've said this on repeat, the church is not something you come to and watch. I'm not a hired entertainer. You might think after today I'm a hired comedian, but that's not the truth. We don't come and watch. This is a family that we come into and we belong to. Like, the best I understand the scriptures is that this is family. This is an organism, a body. Those are the illustrations we get to communicate what's happening in here. Right? And preaching, yes, you see that in the New Testament church, but it's just a piece. And I would actually argue, if you could take all the pieces, it might actually be an insignificant piece. Because Ephesians 4, Paul says this: the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers have been given to the church for what reason? For the equipping of the saints for ministry. That what we do in here is just, okay, here's some ammo, gas up, or we're going out, and for the next 6 days, man, we're going to wage war on Satan. We're going to punch him in his mouth. Like that's what we're going to do. Right? And so we're taking this time to fuel up, to armor up, because there's a real war going on out there. And we say we care about those souls. How much do we care about it? Are we bringing in the big guns? Because I'm telling you, you need God to work in your conversations with the people that you love, the people that you live with, that you work with, that you play with. In all those areas, you need God to intervene in your conversations, in your evangelism, in your witness. We need God to work. And so, yes, this wasn't just foundational in the New Testament church, but you see it over and over reiterated. We're admonished to continue on in prayer. So prayer seems to be crucial and vital to the health of the body. And so as you examine those questions this week, am I desperate for God? Am I desperate for him to move? Press in on that. Press in on what is the reason if you're not? If you're not, is it, do you believe God hasn't worked and moved in your life? Do you believe that he doesn't do anything? And maybe that's your scenario. Maybe that's where you've landed and you say, hey, I've prayed, I've asked, and God didn't give me what I wanted. If that's the scenario, if you're a follower of Jesus, longtime veteran, I just ask you to look back on your life. Back on your life and think about the things that you pleaded for, that you begged for, and God didn't give them to you. And so now you could say, thank God you didn't give me that. I'm sure all of you could come up with examples and illustrations to say, hey, yes, thank God you did not give me what I was asking for, that you knew better than what I was asking for. And we oftentimes find ourselves pleading with God, begging for God, because seasons of life come into play. We find ourselves in situations that feel like a storm, right? We find ourselves to be lost at sea. At times, we find the waves to be overwhelming. And so at those times, we're prone to cry out and be desperate for God. And maybe for you, you say, okay, that used to be me. But now that my life circumstances have taught me some things, my life circumstances have taught me that doesn't mean anything. To cry out, to be desperate for God, that doesn't get me anywhere. And so you become self-reliant. You've trusted in yourself. And I'm not trying to take away from the pain or the hurt that you felt in those seasons, those moments where you're begging God to work. You're begging God to give you what you're asking for, and he's just not doing it. I'm sure that's been difficult. I'm sure that's been hard. I've been there and asked God, would you just change this for me right now? And he hasn't. He's answered differently. And if that's where you're at and you say, hey, God answered differently, I want to just encourage you this morning. I want to encourage you that because God answered differently, it does not mean that he doesn't care. It can't mean that he doesn't care. The fact that Jesus left heaven and came to this earth to get involved in the messiness and got in the storm communicates God cares. You don't get involved in things you don't care about. Right? And so it can't mean that God doesn't care just because he answered differently. And so I promise you, with everything I know about God and his word, he cares. And I don't want to just chalk up the Sunday school answer that says, just trust God either. Because I know that doesn't always bring a warm blanket to the soul. So I want to add more encouragement to then just trust God. I want to know why you can trust God. One pastor in the Waco area, Jonathan J.P. Pokluda, this crew up here loves him. And he once said this: if what you have is not good, then God is not done. What you have is not good, then God is not done. And it reminds me of the words that Jesus spoke in arguably the greatest sermon ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 9 through 11, it says this, or which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks him for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, Jesus is being very flattering when he says that. If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who's in heaven give good things to those who ask him? The confidence that you and I can have that God gives good things is Jesus points it back to sinful humanity. He's like, hey, look at broken humanity. Look at how they're even able to care and love for other people. And if they can, how much more would you think that I could? Right? I'm a perfect God. I infinitely love you and value you. And so why would you question whether or not what I'm giving you is actually good? And so don't misunderstand that quote either earlier, because God doesn't give you everything that you want, but he always gives you what's good. And so the distinguishment is what you might want might not be good. And sometimes children ask for things that aren't good for them. And a loving parent who knows what's actually good will actually give what's the good thing and not just necessarily what the child wants. Right? So God doesn't author bad stories. You might not love every detail of your story, and that's okay. It's okay to not love every detail of the story. It might have been even things that you'd say, hey, I would change this about me. I'd change this about my story. And God's like, no, it's a part of it. And there's something beautiful about it. Beautiful stories can have difficulty in them. Right? I mean, that's what I see when I see the beautifully written psalm, right? The Psalm 23. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. David just says, I'm going to walk through valleys. I'm going to walk through dark times. And what's the comfort that he has? That you're going to be with me. Right? Valleys will be there, but the comfort is, God, you're going to be with me. And his rod and the staff, they comfort it. And so we know that life's going to be hard. We know we find ourselves in situations, difficult situations. Question for you. A lot of you know I'm a movie buff. Who's ever seen the movie The Guardian, starring Ashton Kutcher and Kevin Costner? Wow, I really would have expected more. You know, that movie almost made $65 million. 37% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I'm surprised you haven't seen it. And maybe I just love the movie because there's a lot of sentimentality there for me. When you're 11 or 12 in the Whitcomb home, you get the circle of life talk. And that means a weekend up north with Dad, just to be men and talk about some things. There's PowerPoints, diagrams. No. But you find out where you came from. You find out how it all works. But, you know, my dad made it more special. We went out to dinner Saturday night, and then we went to the movie in Alpena. So if you've ever been to Alpena, there's a nice boardwalk there. We walked the boardwalk, and we made it back for a movie, and we watched The Guardian. And The Guardian, starring Kevin Costner and Ashton Kutcher, is all about the Coast Guard rescue swimmers. And so Kevin Costner, his character's name is Senior Chief Ben Randall. He's the most decorated Coast Guard rescue swimmer ever. And while he's getting older, he's slowing down a little bit, the Coast Guard asked him to go start training the new recruits that would become Coast Guard rescue swimmers. And then Ashton Kutcher comes into play. And his character is he's this hotshot swimmer. Like he could swim at any D1 school, and yet he said, I want to go into, you know, Coast Guard rescue swimming. And throughout the movie, there's something really cool that happens is there's so much friction because Kevin Costner does not like this hotshot, right? Like he thinks he's cocky, he's annoyed by him. And so they continue to challenge each other. And there's continually butting of heads. But by the end, it's a real tearjerker. You know, they develop a strong bond. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm not ruining it for you because you've had like 14 years to watch it. I bring all this up. Why are you talking about The Guardian? Because the Coast Guard rescue swimmers live their lives with a motto. So others may live. And so, on the screen is the quote. That's not unique to the Coast Guard rescue swimmers. Jesus said that long before. That was his life motto long before the Coast Guard rescue swimmers ever adopted that. And the way that quote has been framed only makes sense if you've ever watched the TV show The Office with Michael Scott and Wayne Gretzky. But that's just for fun. Jesus shares his life model for us very upfront. He doesn't mince words. It's actually found in Luke 19. In Luke 19, Jesus shares his life motto, what he's come here to do, what his life is all about on earth. And so if you're not familiar, if you didn't grow up in Sunday school, there's this story that often gets shared when you go to Sunday school. It's the story about this guy named Zacchaeus. Now, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, according to what the scriptures say. It says that he was small in stature. And the story goes, as Jesus was coming into his town, large crowds are accompanying Jesus at this time. And it says that in order for Zacchaeus to see Jesus, because he's desperate to see him, he had to go climb up into something. Do anybody know what that was? Sycamore tree. For what reason? For the Lord he wanted to see. And if you've come to church for any length of time here at Phos, I'm always looking for ways to break us out into song. So there was a child song that was centered on this story. And so if you know it, I'm just going to ask that you sing along with me, and I'll lead us. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. All right, that's a wrap. The story and the song do go on. Zacchaeus does get up in the tree for the Lord he wanted to see. But what's so cool about this story is that Jesus came to Zacchaeus and he says, get down from that tree, or I'm going to your house today. And I was thinking about that part of the song earlier, and you're teaching kids to do this and do an Irish song, and I'm just okay, I should definitely have a beer in my hand. That's his church. I shouldn't have said that. But Jesus comes and he approaches Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, who was so desperate for Jesus to see him, just to witness him. Jesus comes and he invites him to get down from the tree, and he says, I'm going to your house. I want to commune with you. And so from the early onset, you see a flipping of the script, where you think the story is about Zacchaeus pursuing Jesus, but ultimately what the story communicates is that Jesus was pursuing Zacchaeus. And it goes well beyond that. Jesus has pursued each and every one of you in here, and I can confidently say that. Because if you were here this morning, that's evidence in and of itself. That you would hear the word of God spoken this morning is evidence, if nothing else, that Jesus is pursuing your heart. That he has come after you in the middle of your storm, whatever that is. Why? Because his mission statement, that's what he came to do. Verse 10, Luke 19:10 says this, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. There it is. That's what he came to do. That's what I'm about. You want to know what my family's business is about? We are coming after people. Jesus' arrival on earth tells us that he was coming for a rescue mission. He came to seek and to save the lost. And isn't that sweet? Isn't that amazing? Because maybe you've come into this place this morning and feeling like, man, I really made a train wreck of my life. I really wound up in places I never thought I would be. I've done things I never thought I would do. And now I'm wound up here and I just feel stuck. And that message then should be really great news for you. Right? That Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. Man, you're feeling this place where I'm lost, I'm broken, I'm scared. Man, that's the prerequisite to come to Jesus. Jesus didn't come for the healthy, he came for the sick. And so if you're sitting here and you're saying, man, my life is in turmoil, man, you have an invitation. What a sweet invitation you've been called into, is that Jesus is coming after you. He's coming after your heart, that he loves you deeply, so much so that he would go and he would die for you. Jesus has not come for good people. Jesus has come for bad people. In our text this morning in the book of Galatians, Paul continues on his defense of the gospel. And so far, what we've done the last several weeks is we've spent time looking at how Paul has just laid a foundation. He says, hey, you had the gospel. It was given to you correctly, plainly, that it was Jesus and Christ alone that saves. And yet, for whatever reason, you've gone back to this law thing. You somehow infused this as if the two could be working in cohesion together. And Paul says, no, that's not how that works. The law was never meant to save you. It was never meant to cure you. It was meant to tell you that you needed to be cured. Right? That it's a diagnosis that something terrible has gone wrong. And so in the broader sense now, what Paul is doing is he's shifting, and he started shifting it last week. We're going to continue to shift it more this week in his argument. Was I'm bringing in the rescue mission, and I'm showing you the people that I did come for. Right? It's not just law keepers. Actually, I didn't come for law keepers. I came for anyone that couldn't keep the law. And so what that does is today he's showing us the broad range of who he's coming for and who this rescue mission is all about. And so like last week, hey, if it's not about the Mosaic law, then all those people that you once excluded, the people that you made all these different stipulations about, and you see that those aren't really the stipulations. Well then let's actually look at who all this good news is for. And my prayer this morning for us is just if you've come in here and you just feel like I'm too broken or I'm too dirty for God, or that I'm the outsider of the family because of the things I still wrestle with and I still struggle with, and I'm just praying that you be freed from that lie this morning. Like I'm praying that as we look at what God has done for us, each and every one of us, that you would know I'm fully, freely, forever forgiven in Jesus. But like more and more, I just keep the theme of the book of Galatians is Galatians 5, chapter 5, verse 1. Where Paul says it's for freedom that Christ has set you free. Like that's the thing he wants you to know, that you have not been called to live in bondage, that you've not been called to be yoked under a law, but that you've been free to love God and to live in relationship with him. And that is not by the things that you do, but it's about what Christ has already done. And so the more and more I think about that, I just think about so many times we come in here and we feel bound, we feel like we're entrapped, we feel enslaved because of things that we've done or things that we've said, and we just feel, okay, man, I've really messed up. That's reverting back to that thinking that my standing before God or your standing before God is predicated on your performance, and that's just so far from true. It's predicated on Jesus' performance and your surrendering to him. Right, so with that, we're going to continue to see Paul shifting his argument here, and I think this is so cool this morning. If you have your Bibles, Galatians 4, you look at the first 3 verses. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything. But he's under the guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. Now, if you were here last week, Pastor Justin concluded Galatians chapter 3, and as he did that, one of the things that kept getting reiterated in that text in Galatians 3 was this word promise. Right? The continual theme that you would see in Galatians 3 is the word promise, and that God made a promise to Abraham. And so Paul brings in the name Abraham. And it's like, okay, what's this guy doing here? Well, there's a reason why Paul was doing that. Paul was showing that yes, God did make a promise to Abraham. God made a promise that he was going to create for a great nation from the line of Abraham. You know, through Abraham's offspring, there was going to become this great nation that God was going to make for himself a people of his possession. And he made that promise. Well, guess what he did? Guess when he made that promise? 430 years before there was ever a law. And so how could the law be the thing that saves people? Right? Because the promise was well established before that. That God was already creating for himself a people. I thought about a few weeks ago when we first brought up Abraham in Galatians 3, was just acknowledging the fact that the very first Jew was saved by faith. Right? And Paul's just like, okay, how did you guys miss that? How did I miss that growing up? And just in the same way as Abraham was saved, we're saved by faith alone. Right? And so the Old Testament saints were saved in their faith in the coming Messiah, and in the New Testament, we're saved by our faith that's placed in the Messiah that came. And now Paul's going to give us a little bit of an explanation of what he means by heir, because he says it. If you believe in the same way that Abraham has, you've been justified the same way, well, then you're an heir to the same promise. And so this is what he's going to say about being an heir, what it means and how it looks. So he says, here's what I mean. You understand how aging works. You understand how inheritance works. You understand how adoption works. Like Paul is assuming some things about his audience. He's assuming that they understand how the world goes round in their culture and society. And so in Jewish and Greek cultures, they had customs on how boys became men. They had ceremonies that signified, okay, this boy is now a man. And so we see that, when you look through ancient history, but also Roman culture was a little bit different. Roman culture didn't signify an age. They didn't say there was a certain day that a boy became a man. It said that the father would appoint it at the time that he thought the boy was ready. And so Paul clearly here is writing out of a Roman context. Naturally, he's talking to a Roman province. Galatia was a Roman province. And so he's writing them through, because you see that, right? He said the coming of age appointed by the Father. When that day came. And so what Paul is doing here is he's showing that, hey, there's legal rights to becoming an heir. And yeah, people define it differently. And so I want to give you the definition of the kingdom. It's actually a lot like the Roman culture. And so the illustration that he wants us to imagine is that for all of us, let's just imagine right now, like you're living in the first century, you're a son of a wealthy individual, you come from a wealthy family. There are rules that are going to come about with that. You don't get to exercise your rights to the inheritance before the time where your father would appoint you that legal right. And so until that time, yeah, you live in the house. You enjoy the benefits of living in the house. You certainly aren't going hungry. Neither were the servants. Neither were the slaves. So there's really no difference between the child and the slave. The only difference is that one day, yes, the child will become the rightful heir to all of the inheritance. And so Paul's showing them, okay, hey, that's how Rome works. He says, but in the same way, do you see that in the verse? In the same way, just like that. When we were children, when we were just the son, we were just like the child. We were heirs according to the promise. We see that in Galatians chapter 3, verse 29. And the law was our guardian. The thing that prevented us from receiving the inheritance, the thing that prevented the Christians from exercising the rights to all that the Father had for them, was the law. The law was the thing preventing them from fully living into everything that God had for them. Right? And so much so that Paul is actually going to call the law the elementary principles of the world. Hey, back when we used to live in that way, back when we used to live under this guardianship, this management, and we were just like a slave. We were enslaved to those principles. We weren't exercising freedom. We weren't exercising the inheritance. And so Paul's comment here is encouraging them, go deeper. Go further. Go past the law. There's something really beautiful outside of the law. Like the moment you can actually become an heir. But the moment you just continue to live under the law, you're just going to continue to find yourself living like a child under bondage. It wasn't true life found there. And you'll hear us over and over say this as we continue to finish out Galatians. The law is not a bad thing. Paul never calls the law a bad thing. He's just saying, we've redefined it. You guys have redefined it. And so when you redefine something and it's doing something that it's not meant to do, the law was never meant to save. And so if you define it that way, well, then you're going to find it to be a really difficult, broken thing. But no, Paul you will read through Galatians, you will never see Paul condemn the law. But Paul doesn't just stop here. He doesn't just talk about the condition of a child or a son. But in this next moment, he's going to show us the condition of an heir. He's going to show us what liberation looks like. So verse 4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. So verse 4, how it just starts. I love that three-letter word, but. Right? You once experienced what it meant to be in bondage. You once experienced what it meant to be enslaved, but. Is there a better word in the whole Bible than but? Because you think about it, it's like, you see correlation oftentimes, contrasting. This is what it meant to be separated from God. This is what it meant to be broken. But God, but Jesus did something. But Jesus freed us. But Jesus worked and moved when we couldn't. That while we were yet sinners, Christ did something. And so right here we see, but there's more. And the contrast shows us that those elementary principles, those things that once enslaved you, that once held you captive wasn't forever. They weren't forever. And there was a time coming. At just the right time. You see that? The fullness of time had come. This amazing thing to think about, like that God just doesn't show up in an ambulance. He's not showing up late. He's not like, holy, how did this happen before I got here? No, he's just not that way. That's not how God operates. He operates on time. And I'm sure that many of you, though, when you're in those seasons of where you're desperately praying and you're asking God to move, he's just not coming through for you at the time that you thought that he would. I wonder when you hear those words, that the fullness of time had come, that God operates on time. I wonder how that makes you think. I wonder how that makes you feel. I wonder what goes through your mind when you hear that. Because some of you'd say, no, that's not been my story. That's not been my situation. And the church, we need to mourn with people at times. It's okay to feel like God let you down. It's okay to feel that way because we're human. We don't have the full plan. We haven't been given that access. And so just to come alongside and say, hey, I don't understand why God's not moving. I don't understand why God's not working in the ways that you hoped. And just being there with somebody. But no, if you're a believer in here and you're a Christian and you say, hey, I fully trust God, I fully believe his plans are good for me, but I still struggle, I still wrestle with God's timing. Hey, guess what? You haven't graduated from needing sympathy and empathy. And so as the church, we need to love and come alongside each other. We don't always just have to beat each other over with the truth. And yes, the truth can be a really sweet thing, but it's got to be not forced. There's times and places. When somebody's loved one just dies, that in that next moment isn't to say, well, it was their time. It's just God's got a timing for everything. God does have a time for everything. He really does, but it's okay to just say, hey, I'm with you. If you need something, I'm for you. Like, let me in. I'd love to help. I'd love to serve in ways that I can. But God does show up on time. And there is an element, a confidence that we as believers can have in knowing that, hey, when we don't understand why he's not giving me what I'm asking for, that I know whatever it is, it's good. It might not be what I want, but it's good. It might not be what I'd ask for, but it's good. And not only is his time perfect, but he's also shown up. And who he is important. That God didn't just send, it wasn't on time for the right reason, but he sent forth his son. That Jesus was in fact God's son, but he's not just God's son. He's also born of woman. He's born of woman. He's not born of man and woman. He's just born of woman. I think Paul is clearly here identifying the virgin birth. He's bringing that reality into play. But also that word woman here was a term that Paul was using to just indicate that Jesus really was human. That he really was a true man. That's generally what Paul's trying to communicate, that Jesus was a true man. And so yes, he was fully God and he was fully man, and we call that the incarnation. That Jesus wasn't 50-50. He was fully God and fully man, and in that, what he was able to do was that meant he had the ability to save the world from their sin, and he also had the right to do that. Right? As God, perfectly capable of curing humanity, but as a human standing in humanity's place. He was able to reconcile both of those things so that we might receive adoption as sons. Sons. He doesn't say sons and daughters. Your translation may read that way depending on what translation you have. And I would just step in and say, that's not a good translation. That's diminishing from what Paul is actually trying to communicate. Paul intentionally says sons and doesn't say sons and daughters. Paul could have used a gender-neutral word. He's got a pretty vast vocabulary. You read through that New Testament, he says a lot of things, and he's a really smart guy. But here, he intentionally leaves women out of it. I don't know how that makes you ladies feel. But I promise you, the women of Galatia would have heard this as music to their ears, and it's music to our ears today, because Paul's communicating something very deep to their culture. Again, they're living in Rome in the first century. And inheritance and adoption, they worked a little bit differently than they do right here and right now. The eldest son was the heir to the inheritance. And so Paul's continuing a theme that he started back in Galatians chapter 3. If you remember from last week, when Paul comes forward and he says, there's neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, no male or female, for you are all one in Christ. Let me say something real quick. Paul is not saying I don't see color. Paul is not saying I don't see socioeconomic status. Paul is not saying that there's no such thing as gender distinction and gender roles. He's not denying those things. What he's saying is, hey, we've made these stipulations about the gospel, and that none of that matters about the gospel. None of that would prohibit you from being a part of this family. That you can have full rights, full inheritance to this. You know what I think is so cool about that detail too? That Paul says that those exact things was that as a young Jewish boy who was being groomed to be the next high priest, he would have said a creed daily that said, thank God I'm not a Gentile. Thank God I'm not a slave. And thank God I'm not a woman. And now all these years later, as he sees the gospel flourishing, as he sees people becoming a part of this family, he can say, yeah, I had it wrong. Growing up, I had it wrong. Those weren't the things that truly mattered. And so now as he's building out this thought that what God has done for you is that he's brought you, and he's saying, guess who the invitation is for? Guess who the inheritance is for? It's for all of you. You might think, hey, I'm not deserving. I can never be brought in. I can never receive all of that. He's saying, hey, you understand how Rome does adoption. You understand how Rome does inheritance. And I'm telling you, when you get adopted in this family, you have full inheritance just like the son. And so, daughter, your inheritance just like the son. That's why it's beautiful that Paul says adoption as sons to his audience. Because all of them would hear, I'm a full beneficiary of this family. I don't know if you can hear it in Paul's voice, but he's continually getting more and more excited as he's sharing this good news. It's almost as if the next thing he's going to say, let's celebrate. You know, because this has happened, because this is good news for all of us, let's celebrate. And because you are sons, verse 6, and because you are sons, God sent forth his Spirit of the Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. And so if you had any doubts, on whether or not you were really a part of this family, if you were really welcomed in, if you really had full access to God and the inheritance, you say, I'm going to show you exactly how you can know definitively without a shadow of a doubt. I'm going to send my Spirit into your hearts that cries out, Abba, Father. Now that word Abba is at times translated to as daddy. You know, maybe you've heard that Abba means daddy, and I'm telling you, it's actually something much deeper than that. It's much deeper than just saying daddy. This was a term that a young child would say to their father in that culture, but we don't necessarily have an English equivalent to it. And so at times, if you've heard that, I'm not saying it's not necessarily wrong. I'm just saying it's deeper, right? It's deeper than that. And it's better described as a feeling. And I know that gets you thinkers, you A-typers, like feeling, like it's better described as a feeling. And it's better described as a feeling that says that you're seen, known, and loved in the Father's presence. And in that Father's presence, you need not worry about anything. It's this idea of being fully secure, fully safe in the presence. That you would say, Abba, I am totally, safely secure. This is a feeling that God wants our hearts to experience. This is what God wants our hearts to know, that it would communicate. That we are fully, freely, forever forgiven in Jesus. And something else that's really cool about this moment is that Paul uses that word Abba. That's an Aramaic word. And up until this point, the entirety of the letter to the Galatians was written in Greek. Every single word, all Greek. And then in this moment, he stops and he puts quotes on this thing and he throws in an Aramaic word. Well, you know who was an Aramaic? You know who spoke Aramaic? Jesus. He's in this moment quoting Abba, Father. And he's pointing us back to this one singular moment in Jesus' ministry where he says, Abba, Father. It's in the Garden of Gethsemane, the moments where before he's going to die, where he cries out to his Father, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. And if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. but not what I will, but what you will. And Paul points back to that moment. He says, hey, you want to know how you can just fully know that you're a part of this family? That same spirit that was in Christ that allowed him to be obedient, even to the point of death, is going to live inside of you. He points back to Jesus' most vulnerable moment. Where he says, man, if this could be different, I wish that it would be. I wish you would change the circumstance. But because of my safety and security in you, Father, I'm going to be obedient to death. And so in the face of danger, in the face of hardship, in the face of difficulty, you can have that real sense of safety and security because the Spirit lives inside of you. And it's your seal to know that you are fully, freely, forever forgiven, that you have need not worry about anything. And so because we are an heir through God, our citizenship is not of this world. So that means the things that happen in this world, we can just hold loosely to. Not that things don't matter, they do. But ultimately, we know where our security lies. We know where our citizenship is, and it's in a place where moth and rust can't destroy. Our hope can be put in a place that's outside this world, and it can't be touched. And so you see, God has saved us from something, but he's also saved us to something. Right? He saved us from the elementary principles of the world, and he saved us and brought us into his family. And so guess what? When that happens, you get to become about the family business. You get to be called in to this great adventure called the faith, the Christian faith. That same mission that Jesus had to seek and to save that which is lost. Been invited into that. And you don't need to be afraid. You don't need to be scared. Yes, because you know you have that Spirit that lives inside of you. And Jesus has promised to us in the Great Commission, when he calls us in to the family business, go be about my business. Why you need not be afraid is because I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. That's his promise to you. That come whatever may, whatever's going to befall our lives, if you know that the Spirit is in you, living in you, you can be obedient to Christ. He will empower you. God is not going to call you to things that he won't empower you to do. He's not going to call you to things that he's not going to empower you to do. And so, if you're here this morning and you say, hey, I'm not a part of this family, and I don't know if I ever could, because I don't feel like I'm worthy. I don't feel like I've done enough. Jesus knew what he was buying on the cross. It was for the joy that was set before him that he went to the cross. It was these broken people that for whatever reason said he wanted to be in his family. I don't fully understand it. There's a great mystery to that. Like what is so awesome about us that you would so willingly go and die on a cross? Well, he made us in his image. He's put his image on us. He loves us, cares for us so much so I'm coming for you. That's what his arrival shows us. That's what he said on the cross. I came. I conquered. I've offered you a way out. So don't feel like you're too far gone. God knew. And he tells us if we were to confess with our mouth and believe in our hearts that God raised Jesus from the dead, we could have this salvation. You could receive this adoption into this family. And it's a messy family. We don't always get along. Sometimes we hurt each other. But you can be fully secure now and forever in this family. If you're here and you say, hey, I've trusted in Jesus for the forgiveness of sins, I'm part of this family, but life is still hard. Life is still difficult. Don't neglect community. Don't keep your family out of it. And would your siblings, would your brothers and sisters point you to the source of hope? Would your brothers and sisters point you to real healing power, and that's found in Jesus Christ? And so with that, just let me pray for us.